Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 2, Episode 23 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 3 and the rest of the 2022 fantasy football season. I'm your host, as always, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. Nick, we're recording before Monday Night Football. We don't know if we won our matchups, but I'm hoping that all of you out there came out on top this week.
Yeah, some weeks you might get the W in the win column, but then you get a Mike Evans suspension on 3 of them. You get some of these injuries, like Dalton Schultz, who I have in 2 leagues. Like, it's not always a win, even if you walk out with a W.
No, but the wins are important, and you definitely want them. So we're going to talk about the injury news. We'll talk about the suspension. We'll talk about everything that you need to know going into Week 3. It is Tuesday. That means it's our waiver wire episode. A lot of waiver targets for you that we'll talk about. And on top of it, we'll tell you which players that you should send to the garbage can, send over to the waiver wire so you can go and pick up those players. With that said, if this is your first time listening to us, thank you so much. We do this show on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. You can find us on all audio streaming platforms, including but not limited to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Anchor. If you're on iTunes, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. It really does help us out. We really do appreciate that. If you'd rather watch the show instead of listening to it, go to our YouTube channel, PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. You can watch our handsome mugs as we scream and debate about fantasy football. Please interact with us on social media. Give us follows and all that other fun stuff. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok is PrimeTimeFFPod. Facebook and YouTube is PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. Going to talk some injury updates and some news. First off, Dalton Schultz's knee. I thought he came back into the game. Maybe he didn't, though. He avoided an ACL injury. It's actually a PCL. It's basically the same injury that Ezekiel Elliott had last year. He could miss time, although it doesn't seem like he's going to miss a lot of time, but we don't know. We won't know until later this week. We won't know his status for Week 3 until closer to the game, which is a bit annoying because he's playing Monday night against the Giants. He does have an extra day to prepare, however. I would think he misses one game, so a tight end should be a top priority on your waiver wire. If you're like me and Nick, I'm probably drafted one tight end and just drafted Dalton Schultz. So how worried are you about Schultz as an owner in 2 leagues? I have him in 3 of mine.
I'm very worried. This is kind of like a hamstring where it's a lingering injury. You'll see the effects of it all year long. And Dalton Schultz was looking good. He looked good for pretty much all of last year. He looked good Week 1 as a fantasy player, and Week 2 he couldn't deliver. He didn't have the injury. I'm worried for him. I'm worried about that Cowboys offense in total. Schultz is a big loss to when Dak gets back. It's a big loss to that receiver room who, it's really CeeDee Lamb, him, and then the running game. And, it's a big piece of why all those pieces are going to work and put up points. So I'm worried, not panicking, but I'm very close to the panic button with the whole Cowboys offense.
Just speaking about Schultz, I'm not even close to panicking. I'll bench him for a week or 2. He only was averaging, I think, 4 or 5 points a game. He hasn't gotten in the end zone yet. He hasn't had the target numbers that I hoped he would get. I'm okay with picking up a tight end for a week or 2. Cowboys offense is a different story, but they seem better with Cooper Rush than they did with Dak Prescott. So not hitting the panic button on them as well. Michael Pittman, an update on his quad injury, according to head coach Frank Wright, who's not a great coach, in my opinion. Horrible start to the season. He made good progress, and he could play in Week 3 against Kansas City. We'll have a better update as the week goes on, but that's promising. J.K. Dobbins' knee, this is going to be a storyline throughout the entire season. It seems like John Harbaugh called him week to week. That's not promising. It seems like all those reports from Schefter and Rappaport early on in the offseason that he wasn't going to be ready for Week 1. And Lamar Jackson even said it'd be a couple of weeks. If you're a J.K. Dobbins owner, you got to be frustrated. This is why I traded Dobbins off my dynasty team. Jacobs isn't doing much in return, but still, this is why I want to know part of J.K. Dobbins this season. An update on Jerry Jeudy's ribs. It's likely an SC joint injury, which I believe is between his ribs and his shoulder, I think. X-rays were negative. He's called day-to-day. It seems like he'll have a chance to play this week against the 49ers. But again, we won't have a better update until our Thursday show or Friday show. James Conner's ankle, it's not considered to be long-term or serious. I think he would play this week, but again, won't know until later this week. Just keeping you guys updated. And here's one we could talk about. Mike Evans has been suspended for one game. He'll miss the Buccaneers versus Packers game. However, he can appeal it. If he does appeal it, he could either play the game and then the appeal could be decided next week, or he could appeal it and he could win the appeal. It looks like there's going to be a bunch of fines that will be handed out, probably Marshawn Lattimore and a couple others that got involved in that scuffle. But I think the league is handling this one a little bit differently since the Bucs and the Saints have had some bad blood over the last few years. I mean, Nick, to me, this is a bigger loss for Tom Brady than if you're a Mike Evans owner, like, it sucks. You don't have him for a game. If you're a Tom Brady owner, who is he throwing to? Like, he's another week that Tom Brady is. I try not to bust the same player back-to-back weeks, but he would be on my bust list for this week against Green Bay.
No, I agree. Brady's the concern, but I mean, being an Evans owner, you got to be furious. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, did he do the right thing? Absolutely. You stand up for your quarterback. And he said it. He said it right. What do you want me to do? That's Tom Brady. Of course, he's going to go do what he had to do. And it's a team he's had beef with. It's a corner that's pretty much not locked him down for most of his career, but has always given him trouble throughout his career. It's infuriating, especially because, to me, Tom Brady, for fantasy purposes, is replaceable. There's enough guys on the waiver. We'll talk about them very soon, but there's enough waiver guys that you can play on a week-to-week basis and remove Brady for the 1 week that he's missing all these weapons. But Mike Evans is going to be very hard to replace in your fantasy lineups. You can't replace a wide receiver 1 or 2 with a guy that you hope to stream. Like, you need to have the depth at wide receiver to replace him, and that's not even guaranteed because Mike Evans is a guy that can go put up a 40 or 50 bomb. Not a lot of guys in this league can do that.
Yeah, you're right. You kind of just got to roll with it and see what happens. There's nothing you could do. It's not an injury, at least, but there's nothing you could do. If you do need to replace Mike Evans this week, let's go to your waiver wire and see what you got. We're going to talk about the top waiver targets for this week. There's a lot of names that we put in here, some names that Nick's going to talk about because I don't want to touch them, but that's okay. Let's start with the quarterbacks that could be on your waiver wire. And we tried to do 50% or under in most ESPN leagues. However, some of them are a little bit above 50% because they're so close and they should be 80 or 90%. So first one we have is Carson Wentz. He's owned in 56.7% of fantasy leagues. He's been a top 10 fantasy quarterback back-to-back weeks as a top 5 quarterback this week. He is a garbage time machine. He's right up there with Kyler Murray without the rushing numbers. I think he's your best quarterback yet if you need a quarterback. If you don't have Dak Prescott, if you're not happy with Russell Wilson or Joe Burrow, I think this is a pretty solid get off the waiver wire.
Yeah, I completely agree. This week he goes up against Philly. We'll see how they look tonight. You guys have already seen it, and you'll have a much better gauge on the Philadelphia defense going into next week. But they're going to be coming off a short week with the Monday game. Wentz has a good matchup. We just saw Jared Goff go cook them last week. And Wentz is putting up good numbers. I think he's the league leader in passing touchdowns right now, which is insane to think about.
I think he's averaging like 300 yards a game too.
Yeah, so they got the weapons. He's putting up the numbers. He's doing everything you need for fantasy. So
and not for nothing, like garbage time is garbage time, but like Matt Ryan stunk in garbage time against the Jags. So it's like even if it's garbage time, like you still have to throw the ball and your guys still have to catch the ball. So
it's so crazy to think that there are going to be people this week. And it makes perfect sense that, you're going to put Tom Brady on your bench for Carson Wentz. That's crazy.
I mean, if you want to win.
You should.
Yeah. Let's speak about Jared Goff. He's the quarterback 8 on the year. He's only owned in 6.8% of leagues. If Carson Wentz is gone, if Tua's gone, and you know what? Why don't I have Tua on this list? This was a Nick mistake.
He's owned in 70% of leagues.
That's why I don't have Tua on this list.
I would put him on.
I have him at 64% in ESPN. Tua's on this list too. If Tua's in your league, I would put Tua right at Wentz. Get one of them. If you can't get one of them, I think Jared Goff's a pretty good option. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown's looking like this season's Cooper Kupp. So I think Jared Goff's a suitable quarterback. Let's move on to some of these wide receivers. Garrett Wilson owned in 69.8% of leagues, just one little decimal off of a really nice number there. Curtis Samuel, 67.6% of leagues. He was one of my top waiver targets. If he's still available in your league, he led the football team in targets again. Go get Curtis Samuel. Sterling Shepard's owned in 10.2% of leagues. Noah Brown is owned in 0.8% of leagues. Corey Davis, 4.2%. Greg Dortch, 2.8%. Nelson Aguilar, under 1%. And Ashton Dolan, I don't know how to say his last name, owned in 2.4% of leagues. Nick, I want you to talk about the back half of this list because personally, the only receivers I'm actually looking to pick up this week out of these three are Garrett Wilson, Curtis Samuels, and Sterling Shepard. And Curtis Samuel and Garrett Wilson are probably gone. So,
okay, so I'll go through them real quick. Noah Brown, to me, if you are on the back half of your waiver wire and you're not going to get a Garrett Wilson, a Curtis Samuel, or Sterling Shepard, he's a must-add. Last week, put up five targets, 5 catches, 91 yards. 4 of those catches came on big third down plays. I forget if he saw a touchdown in the game, but he did put up a monster week. He's currently the wide receiver 16, and he's the wide receiver 2 over in Dallas. It doesn't look like Gallup is going to play next week either. So if that's the case, Noah Brown, to me, is a must-start. Corey Davis, real quick, wide receiver 18 on the year. He has 14 targets, 150 yards, and a touchdown through 2 weeks. I don't love him as a pickup, but it's very hard to ignore that kind of workload and that kind of target share. Joe Flacco is leading the league in passing attempts so far at 102. So in a game this week up against the Bengals, where they'll probably have a game script just like these past 2, where he's going to have to throw 40-plus times in the game, Corey Davis is a fine streaming play. I played him this past week, and he made all the points on that last catch, but it still works. That at the end of the day, like I said, 14 targets, 150 yards. Half of that is about 5 catches for 75 yards. That's 12.5. That's a great flex play. Aguilar, don't touch, not worth it. Greg Dortch, wide receiver for the Cardinals, looks like the wide receiver 1 over there while DeAndre Hopkins is out. Is leading is number 2 on the team in targets, is number 1 on the league on the team in yards. So definitely a good play. They're picking up all those points in the second half. If they could put together a good first half of offense, Dortch is a good play on that back half. And then Ashton Dulin, if we see Michael Pittman miss another game, he's a must-add. He was a monster this past week, and he was a clear wide receiver 1 over there.
All right, moving on to running backs. Jeff Wilson Jr. is only owned in 61.3% of leagues. I think he had 12 fantasy points without a touchdown, got absolutely vultured. His backup, Tyrion Davis-Price, actually kind of split carries with him, but he didn't. The production wasn't there for Price, and now he has a high ankle sprain. He's out a couple of weeks. Jeff Wilson Jr. is the guy over there. Like, he's probably owned in your league. But 61%, that means there's 40% of ESPN leagues that he's not owned in. He's got to be your number 1 waiver target in my eyes. Nick agrees. Sorry about that. Mark Ingram, 27.6%. He's on 27.6%. To me, if Kamara misses more time because of the rib injury, it seems like something that could linger. I think it's good to have the running back 1 on your team from the Saints offense. Darrell Williams. I thought Darrell Williams was hurt. 3.6% of leagues for Darrell Williams. I thought he was hurt.
I think he got dinged, but it looked like he was going to be fine for the week.
Okay. For me, the only 2 pickups here are Jeff Wilson and Mark Ingram. I wouldn't touch Darrell Williams. And the reason I'm saying not to touch some of these guys is because we'll talk about in stash or trash. Like, you have to drop somebody to pick somebody up. So, like, I don't want the Jets wide receiver 3. I don't want the Cowboys wide receiver 2. Like, it's just like, I personally on my teams drafted benches that I pretty much like. If you don't like your benches, it's a different story. But like, I have like Jahan Dotson on most of my benches, and I want to keep him. So anyway, but yeah. So if you can't tell already, I don't like the waiver wire this week. I don't see a lot of players on my waiver wires that I like.
Oh, I'm gonna have to clip that for the end of the year.
All right,
just so you know, one of these guys is gonna wind up finishing as a top 15 at their position.
Probably just because I said
and it's gonna sound like a regrettable take, but I mean, you're right. You gotta hit it.
I mean, I like the guys I spoke about, but they're probably owned in most leagues anyway. So I'm speaking about them. They're good picks, but
we said it all preseason. You win on the waiver wire. You got to pick the right guys these weeks.
Yeah,
these are the important ones.
All right, moving on to the tight ends. Gerald Everett, tight end 4 on the year. He's only owned in 30.7% of leagues. If you need a tight end like you've Dalton Schultz or Kittle's really bugging you, go get Everett. Or Logan Thomas. Nick's been high on Logan Thomas, only owned in 20% of leagues. So let's talk about it, Nick. Who would you say are your top 5 waiver targets this week?
Okay. I mean, the top 3 are clear. It's Garrett Wilson, Curtis Samuel, and Jeff Wilson. Any order. Garrett Wilson and Jeff Wilson's the top, Curtis Samuel number 3. But all 3 of them are owned in over half your league. So if none of those 3 are there, and you're picking on the back half of the waiver, guys I like, Corey Davis, like I said, 14 targets. That's 7 targets per game as a wide receiver 3 and an offense throwing 50 times a game. It looks like it'll be like that for the next week or 2 until Zach Wilson returns. If that's the case, he's a must play every week up until Wilson's back. If you're going to have 50 attempts from your quarterback and they're going to go to players, you can't pass on playing a guy like that.
But it's just like devil's advocate here. That goes against your whole Elijah Mitchell take. That all 3 Jets wide receivers are not going to perform. Like I don't care what team it is. 3 wide receivers aren't performing. Like
the one
it goes against your Elijah. It goes against your Elijah Moore take.
Well, yeah, it does. Elijah Moore's the one that hasn't been performing with Joe Flacco. He's been the worst of the 3. So to me, right now, it looks like Corey's the wide receiver 2 on the team.
All right,
and
that's fair.
Elijah Moore's getting his workload cut. I think Elijah Moore will look a lot better when Zach Wilson's there. But for right now, Flacco's favorite target is Wilson, and number 2 is outside of the running backs is Corey Davis. So
all right, so you got Corey Davis. Who would be your 5th?
And then I would probably go with Greg Dortch. I think you could play him for another 4 weeks as a lock and loaded starter. They've been using him like crazy. I think he's a great ad.
I will go my top 3. Jeff Wilson's my 1-1. Curtis Samuel, Garrett Wilson's going to be my 3 because I still don't know what the Jets receiver room is going to look like the rest of the year in terms of where the ball's getting spread. So I'll make him my number 3 though. So my last 2. I'm going to give Greg Dortch my seal of approval. Nick sold me on him, so I'm going to go Dortch. And for my 5th, Mark Ingram. Like he's still only owned in 27.86% of leagues. He had a tough matchup against those Bucks. I'll go with Mark Ingram, but I really do like Carson Wentz, and I really do like Gerald Everett as well. So those are guys that need to be added on your waiver wire if you can. Also, defenses look really tough this week. Like I was looking at streaming options. There's really not much. It could be you may need to really throw some darts at the board next week if you're streaming defense. There's a lot of really close NFL matchups. I'm just going to run through some of these games, Nick. I just had it like Colts Chiefs. As much as the Colts look bad, like as Pittman's there, like I still can't. Texans Bears. I feel like they're the same team. Falcons Seahawks. I wouldn't play either. Bills, Dolphins, Lions, Vikings, Ravens, Pats, Bengals, Jets, Eagles, Commanders. Like I'm looking at each matchup. There's really no favorable defensive matchups next week. If the Chargers are on your waiver wire, get them to play Trevor, but Trevor looked good this week. So you know what? You're throwing darts this week if you're
absolutely.
All right. Last segment, stash or trash. If you're picking up one of these guys off the waiver wire, you have to drop somebody. Let's talk about some guys that you probably could or maybe want to trash. Aaron Rodgers at 95%. I can't do it. If you drafted Rodgers, you knew what you were getting out of him. You knew the offense they were running. He wasn't going to have MVP numbers. I think he's still better than I don't know. I can't drop Aaron Rodgers for like Carson Wentz. As much as like I'm hyping up Wentz, I just still can't do it. If you chose to draft Rodgers, there's a reason I didn't choose to draft Rodgers.
So for me, I'm not dropping him yet, but I think he belongs on your bench. I think next week he's got Tampa. Following week, New England. Those are 2 teams that have been pretty good against the quarterback position so far for fantasy. I know Rodgers is better than both of the players that they face, but with no receiving weapons there, with 2 great secondaries right there, he's belongs on a bench spot for the next 2 weeks of football.
All right. Well, you know what? I would put Aaron Rodgers in the same category as like Russell Wilson and Joe Burrow. I think they're all in the doghouse. So.
I agree.
Moving on to wide receivers, Chase Claypool owned in 82% of leagues. I'm stashing him. It's too early. I don't love the Steelers offense. I don't love Mitch. I would love to see a quarterback change at some point, but I think he still has too much talent to be on the waiver wire. If your bench is like 8-10 deep, like bench him.
I agree. I wouldn't drop him up until we see the Kenny Pickett switch.
Sky Moore, 50%.
You got to cut him now. I know they use the first round draft capital, but I think he's had 3 or 4 targets in total in his short career. He's the wide receiver 4 or 5 over there. You're never going to want to play him.
Do you want to hear a take? And we have a couple of these guys on here. Here's my take. Every Kansas City receiver should be dropped, not named Juju. We have all 3 of them here, so let's just talk about all 3 of them. Sky Moore is owned in 50%. Where are the Marquise Valdez-Scantling, 69.3, and I don't have the third one.
McCole Hardman.
I don't have Hardman's number either. But I don't want to own any of them because I don't know. I would never feel comfortable playing one of them in my flex spot. It would literally have to be in like a 14-man league, and I'm hoping for a touchdown. I would drop all 3 of them. I think there's better talent out there.
Give me 1 sec because I actually had a good stat about this. Gotta find it again, but there was one of them that I really liked because they were seeing like an insane amount of red zone usage. I believe it was MVS who was getting a lot of workload in the passing game compared to his counterparts over there.
Okay. I would drop the other two at least for sure. Russell Gage, 55.1.
I would hold him for the Mike Evans suspension game,
Okay.
and then I would be willing to cut him after that.
That's a good call. Yeah, I would do the same. Darnell Mooney, 92.2% he's been horrible. Like his team's been horrible and he's been horrible.
So, Nick, I warned you about this after week 1, and I didn't realize it was going to be this bad. So we all blamed week 1, the monsoon, on Justin Fields' 17 pass attempts. Well, then what was the reason for this past week on Sunday Night Football where he threw less pass attempts in a game where they were down the entire time? He currently has...
Matt Nagy's still coaching the Bears. Like, that's just a thing.
He has the 33rd most passing attempts in the league at 28.
Yeah, that's a
big red flag. I would try and trade Mooney on name value.
What are you going to get from him right now?
That's a good question.
I don't think you could trade him. I don't think he has any value, so you can't trade him at this point.
I don't know. I would try and move him if you could.
For who? Like who? If I offered you a trade for Darnell Mooney, like who would you send me back?
I'd have to look through and think about who went like in a similar round.
Would you want him?
No, I don't want him.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, who wants him?
I don't know. He's got some name value though. He's still rostered.
He's not tradable
in the leagues.
He's not tradable. He has to be on your bench for a couple of weeks until he puts something together. He's not droppable. He's definitely not droppable, but he's not tradable. That's a tough situation. He needs to face the Jets. That's what he needs to do.
That's not nice.
Okay, Amari Cooper is now going to start in my dynasty lineup this week because he had a good game against the Jets. I've been sold on Amari Cooper.
You know, I benched Amari Cooper. So in one of my leagues, I had Michael Pittman, Chris Godwin, and Keenan Allen, all 3 out week 2. It's a 3 wide receiver start and 2 flex. I still chose to bench Amari Cooper this past week.
I'm playing Cooper this weekend against that Steelers defense because they're not good against the receivers. So I'm actually going to play Cooper this week. Cooper's not in the segment. Robbie Anderson at 58.4%. I am dropping him. He's not the wide receiver one on a team that doesn't throw a lot to the receivers.
He's out targeting your guy.
He did it this week. Hold on. DJ Moore is not my guy. I am not a DJ Moore guy. I have rebutted with you with DJ Moore, but I am not a DJ Moore guy. I have never drafted DJ Moore in a fantasy league.
I have a graphic that says that you think he will finish in the top 20 wide receivers in fantasy.
You're right. I wish I could I wish I could have updated those rankings closer to.
Maybe we could do like a mid-season update. That would be fun.
I'll be honest. We should have done an update before the draft because my thoughts changed so dramatically in those 2 weeks.
I agree.
Like, for example, I have Amon-Ra St. Brown on the team, and he would have made my top 24 by a mile. But again, didn't update the graphic. Anyway, would you drop Robbie Anderson or would you keep him? I would drop him.
I'd hold him for now.
Kadarius Toney, a guy we were really, really high on. I'm dropping him if it's not a dynasty league. He's the wide receiver like 3 or 4 in their team, and Saquon's not even counted in that.
Did you see the thing about not to get too off topic, but did you see the thing about Kenny Golladay this week?
What about it?
So after the game, he packed his locker and he left. They're 2-0.
Well, it's better than better than AB, I guess.
So Kadarius Toney right now has the 3rd most snaps on his team in the wide receiver position. He's being outsnapped by a guy named David Sills. I don't want to say cut him because he's too talented to cut, but I mean, if he does not outsnap him next week, it's time to let him go.
If you're in a 6-man bench, I think you have to cut him.
Yeah.
If you're an 8 or 10, maybe not. But
well, like you said, you don't like the waiver options this week, so maybe this is a week you could hold them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this segment's also like if you're picking up a waiver option as well. If you're going to pick up Greg Dortch, then yeah, drop Kadarius Toney. DJ Chark at 52.5%.
I can't believe he's owned in this high percent of.
I think he's worth a hold, but he didn't have 1 reception last week. He may have had a couple targets, but he didn't have any receptions. So I think this is just Amon-Ra St. Brown's offense with Swift.
So he had the 3rd most snaps for any of the wide receivers there. He's actually snapped by Josh Reynolds. And he had 4 targets, 2nd most on the team, or 2nd most for the wide receiver position. I think he might be worth the hold.
If you're seeing my reaction, Nick, you want to guess who just scored the first touchdown for the Bills?
The Bills? Was it Isaiah McKenzie?
Oh, it is not.
Who is it?
It is Reggie Gilliam, number 41.
Well, good, because I have to play against Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen stacked today.
Well, I need Stephon Diggs, so. All right, moving on to the running backs for Stash or Trash. Ramondre Stevenson at 81.7%. I cut him before kickoff this week to pick up Mark Ingram.
Yeah, it's time to go.
Raheem Mostert at 51.1. He got the running back 1 snaps this week. I don't love holding onto a Dolphins running back. If you need to pick up somebody, he's cuttable, but I wouldn't drop him just to drop him.
There's no running back outside of Jeff Wilson I would want on the waiver wire, so I would go with no.
Melvin Gordon at 78%. To me, he's not cuttable because again, the waiver wire to me is thin at the moment, but I don't love his usage at all. And I don't love his coach either. Nathaniel Hackett, you suck, dude. Like,
don't you mean Matt Nagy?
He coaches like Matt Nagy, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm not cutting Gordon. Gordon's too talented.
Kenneth Walker.
No, it's a rookie first game off an injury. You can't cut him. I know we might want to, but San Francisco always defends the run well. Like, it was the worst situation he could have came back against.
Yeah, it's a pretty bad situation, but I'll be honest, I don't have high hopes for anybody on that Seahawks team going forward. They won their Super Bowl already. They don't care. Pete Carroll kept on coaching for 1 more year just to stick it to Russell Wilson. That's the only reason he's still coaching. The one tight end here who Nick said to cut last week, who had 0 receptions. Cole Kmet, 60.5% of leagues. You got to cut him at this point.
I heard a nickname on Twitter. It was Cole Cutmet for this week. So it's time to let him go.
Yeah. Alrighty, guys. That's our show for today. Waiver wire, lock, flop. Hopefully you get the waivers that you want. Make sure you put your waivers in for all of your leagues and set them in the order that you want them and cut the guys that you don't want and make some room for those guys. If you enjoyed the show, you hear from us again on Thursday. We'll give you some injury updates and some news and a full Thursday Night Football preview, a short show on every Thursday. You can find that show and all our shows on all audio streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, all the fun podcasting stuff. If you want to go to YouTube, Primetime Fantasy Podcast, that's where you can watch us and our handsome mugs. Every single episode is dropped there. Keep connecting with us on social media at PrimeTimeFFPod on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube, Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Thank you guys so much. Hopefully you get the waivers that you get and start preparing for your Week 3 matchups.